tested education. I wanted to become a teacher. I did not want to go back and becoming like my mother, who was being abused. My best friends getting married when they're young. The life they lived was very difficult, and I just thought that being a teacher was the best thing that was going to happen to me.
So let me just follow up one moment, because as we think about how do systems fail, you broke the system for yourself. But there was something about the system that was also failing, as you say, your best friend who was being forced into marriage. How do you describe that? I mean, what is that failure?
I think for me, when you ask about what has failed, it's because we categorize these things under the cultural. We say FGM is cultural, so people have been practicing, let's not tamper with it. And we talk about have this thing called customary marriages. So girls can be married. That law is very tough, but at the end of the day, actually implementation of the law is, we have great laws, but they're not in the village.
Right.
I mean, they're not there. And we really change and make the difference and end gender-based violence in all forms. We have to go to that last mile. It's not quantifiable. There is no roads. I mean, we have to take off our shoes and really change for women.
She does around pause that. I'm going to on this, but before I want to come back to the mission here, because what you were said, it's not a law. The laws are there. So you know where I'm going. You're president. We've got laws that are there. What's the challenge then?
Well, we need women not to be citizens of second class, because that's the main problem.
Yeah.
We need to continue empowering women. I mean, women are powerful, but culturally speaking, in many places, men don't see women as citizens, as them. They expect that. I remember that one soldier raped a lot of women, and they asked him about why, and he said, because I learned in my life that women that have no value. They're just something that I can do whatever I want with them. So we need to, on one hand, ensure that, I mean, we have great women, fantastic. We need to show them. They need to be role models for other women. We need, I mean, laws wouldn't not only in the village, even in the city, they don't work, because you don't change culture, you don't change the attitude. So we need much more women like all these women here, and men who support also women equality and gender equality and women's empowerment, to be all, you know, making partnership, making our voices stand up for their human rights.
Point. I mean, if it's just women doing this alone and in isolation, what's the point, right? Men are needed in this fight for equality and ending gender-based violence. I want to come to you because you come at these issues from a public-private partnership. I wonder states haven't necessarily done what they should, or perhaps even from the private sector. Maybe they're not doing what they should be doing.
I think your point on the system is important, because we do a lot of work at Children's Investment Fund Foundation on child marriage, education, commercial sexual exploitation of children and other interrelated issues. And the complexity of the system, just as a victim to navigate that system, the police need to be child-friendly, the courts need to be child-friendly, you need child welfare committees, you need support, you need rehabilitation, you need reintegration, you need social protection for the family.
Right. Yes.
You need an entire system, and that's for the victim. Similarly, for prevention, you need an entire system. You need vigilance. System solution to this problem, and we need a full system attack on those that prevent the action on this system. So where can public-private partnerships help? Where can philanthropies help? There's lots of innovation that's needed. If you take back to your point about boys are getting sex education from pornography online. Yeah. If we are not online countering misinformation of that kind, people talk about misinformation that gets crazy populists elected. Right. Where is the misinformation online on sex education?
Absolutely.
We need to be giving positive images of girls. We need to be engaging with boys where they are. We need to understand what they're searching for, why they don't have that information, and giving them positive information. So I think there's a full system. We need NGOs to be well to connect all the points of the system. We need strong advocacy and accountability, and we need to use technology to get to young boys where they are getting information.
All right, now, Kate, I didn't think that we were going there about pornography, but since you brought it up, it turns out you're right. I mean, there is so much misinformation that we talk about with regard to democracy, the spreading of fake news and whatnot. But far less attention is being driven at pornography online and the fact that boys are using it at very high frequencies, and so are men, and the violence that's associated with that, and how they come to understand what sex is. This is not a kind of anti-pornography, but I'm just talking about the failure to understand the sort of violence that can come out of these very unreasonable expectations that are there, and also the rise of hate and gender-based violence online, right? A kind of toxic masculinity such that if things aren't going well for you, it's because some woman caused this. And that's a really important point for us to talk about. I want to wrap up this question with you, Honorable Poto Williams, because you're working on these issues in New Zealand. New Zealand has, certainly touched the hearts in very interesting ways for those of us in the United States, given gun violence, that has touched closely to home for you. We're not talking about that, though that is a key component of gender-based violence. We know that at least in the United States, if there is a gun in the house and there's domestic violence, that woman is 5 times more likely to be murdered by her partner. But I'm wondering how you all see these issues in New Zealand, and are there things that we can learn from, given what you do?
Wow, that's a big question.
I know, it's so unfair.
I wasn't expecting that. I think I want to reference what Kate was saying. In New Zealand, in the world, a lot of what we use to determine who we are and our self-worth comes from those around us and the images or the information that we access every day. And in the Western world, that's increasingly come from social media. So not only are men and boys accessing information that's harmful and detrimental to their well-being and the way they are brought up, women and girls also have got a misconstrued view of what it is to be a good woman. So when we're talking about these issues, we need to bring them much closer to home. What is it that we're doing in our schools? What is it that our institutions are set up to deliver in terms of the conversations we are having every day about our value and our self-worth? And I think those are really important issues. Who is it that determines how we feel about ourselves, our importance, our value? When we're accessing a lot of this information, our peers who are telling us to be a woman, you have to behave in a particular way, you have to dress in a particular way, you have to behave in a particular way. As a parliamentarian, we see these things every day, that we are judged more on what we wear than what we say and how we act. Now that has got to stop.
Yeah.
So but the question that you ask about how we have dealt with tragedy in recent times in my city and our nation, that in March was tragic in many ways, and it led us to address a whole lot of issues, but it gave us an opportunity to deal with guns and violence that comes from that in a way that was unequivocal, and we had to do it quickly before the rest of the, people woke up to the fact that we were dealing with this issue. So it took leadership and courage, and it took speed and action, and that opportunity doesn't always come our way.
Thank you so much for that. So, Dr. Natia, a question for you. Do you think that we see more violence today, or is it just simply that we recognize violence today and we have opportunities for individuals to violence?
Well, there are two things. The internet has made it very possible for us to really see violence everywhere. So everybody in the world has access to some form of internet or phone that can record these things. But what I'm seeing is that things are going underground.
Okay.
FGM in Kenya doesn't happen publicly, but it happens in the midnight. They're bringing anesthesias. They're treating the girls right after that. So it is not harming them.
Okay.
So that is what is now more alarming for me. When we talk about gender-based violence and it going down, we need to tackle those issues that are going underground. And how do you handle that is by being very present in all the places. And I think what Kate talked about is what has really helped me put everything up. I mean, I have 500 girls who have avoided FGM and early marriages, and that is because I have used the system to roll out for it. So when a girl reports that she's in a situation, the police are there, the medicals are there, every system falls in place to work with them, and you can only everybody to be accountable for that. So you do need the system that works for the girls.
There are two things that you've mentioned, and then also Kate, to high, right? You talked about privacy, talked about culture, right? We see that in places where there's forced underage marriage. In fact, I can tell you from my field research in India, I've been taken to underage marriages by judges who are performing them, who say, well, you know, this is just culture, this is just simply what these people do. So this raises a question about how institutions fail. If we need police officers, if we need government, police officers, whomever, to actually be doing their work and to not be corrupt. That's incredibly important. I want to turn to you, Trevor, because you work on LGBTQ issues. And it seems to me that that's also a space where issues go underground as well. And could you share a little bit about that? Because so often when we talk about gender-based violence, it's just a woman's issue, just a girl's issue. It's not. Boys are affected by it. Trans individuals are affected by it. Gay men and lesbian women are affected by it. And can you speak a little bit to that?
Okay, I'm going to share a bit some of the experiences that I had, especially in 2017. Because especially as a gay man, like I believe there are also other gay men in here. When it comes to verbal abuse, it's something that we face almost on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, as well as physical abuse. Just because of toxic masculinity, whenever people see you as though you're not really that masculine, they always try to take advantage of that. And this is also one of the issues that we need to start addressing whenever we talk about gender-based violence, because the more we're not talking about it, the more we're getting deaths from the LGBTIQ community. A lot of transgender people are being murdered almost on a daily basis, and nothing is being said about it. And we're being erased, especially in our communities. In 2017, a friend of mine was found dead under his bed. And I think this resonates from that area where someone really needs some companionship, and you get someone into your space that you trust, and you do not know that they're going to harm you in that way. So I think when we start talking about gender-based violence, we do not need to talk about it in silos, but it needs to be something that is more comprehensive, something that touches on women, something that also touches on the LGBTIQ community, because we're all fighting against toxic masculinity.
Thank you so much for that. So how do we begin? So I wonder, this is a question I'll throw out to the broader panels, and anybody can jump in. Do you think that somehow we've not done enough with regard to our language, how we talk about gender-based violence? Is there something that we need to pay greater attention to just in terms of the words that we use? So
I certainly
follow up with
believe
you,
there's
Kate.
just from my work experience, that when we're talking about violence, the word violence is confronting for some. And we have to find ways to have the conversation over a whole range of settings to allow for people who find this topic confronting to feel safe to have the conversation. To create safe space for men to engage in the conversation as well around their behaviour. And we can't do that if we're always shouting at them and blaming. So we have to create the environment where it is okay to talk about this stuff. That's not easy. That takes courage, and that takes a grown-up attitude to recognise this stuff happens, let's deal with it.
Okay. Kate, and the High Commissioner? Yes.
Yeah, in terms of, things like child marriage, child prostitution, it's child rape. It's institutionalized child rape. And we have to start calling it what it is.
Yeah.
We work in the field of commercial sexual exploitation of children. These are not customers of sex workers. These are men raping children. They had no choice entering that situation. And I'm not is because they were abducted as a young child and forced into it. So we need to start calling this out. And I think there have been remarkable steps forward. If you take, for example, in India, they have started to talk about child rape in marriage, which I think is a really important step forward, naming the problem. So I think we need to do that. And I would really agree that we also need to think about spaces for men and positive male role models. When I look at my amazing husband and his amazing father, and what a great role model he is for my two boys, I feel like my job is so much easier as a mother. So we need to find ways to pass intergenerationally big shifts in norms, and we need to do that in a way that gives men a really important role in that process.
Okay.
I just want to add to what Christina and Kate has said, and I want to give a more practical way that I've been dealing with the issues of FGM. And the process always has been condemning the culture, and you're doing something bad. But what about is that I found education was the commonplace that everybody agreed on. And from there is when we started talking about what hinders girls from continuing with their education. And literally, you have to stay there. It's not something that you just show up and you do a one-day event and then you go and this is the law and we move on. You have to be persistent and you stay there. And over years, the men, I work with fathers because they're the custodians of culture. I mean, you're not going to end FGM if you don't bring the fathers to the talk, and you're not going to end it if you don't talk with the boys. And you have to create this space, and we have done this from looking at the report card to talking about FGM to talking about child marriages, and it's working.
So I've got a question for you on this point. How do you talk to fathers who've already practiced FGM on their daughters?
The fathers will tell you it's the mothers who practice it. It's not us. It's a blame game. If you don't allow for that blame game to happen, every away. But if you create this space, that conversation ultimately changes, because at the end of the day, they actually don't want to hurt their daughters.
Yeah.
They don't want to hurt their daughters. And when you show them the consequences, you know, child marriage, difficulties in childbirth, it's reality. They have seen it. You just need to stay and educate and move or stay.
Thank you. Thank you. So how do these issues involving men, where do you see the role of men in the work that you do? Does your work involve bringing fathers, bringing husbands in as well?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
So with your work, working with women who've experienced domestic violence, do you also work with the husbands?
Yes, mainly my work, it was with the survivor girl. As I said, between 9 years and 65 years. But
I met a lot of their husbands and their families are traumatized. Not only survivor, they are traumatized. What happened is not easy. They killed at the same time more than 6,000 of the men, and they kidnapping 6,500 women and children. So how you can imagine the psychological and physical state that this atrocity have caused. So all of them, they are deeply traumatized. When I speak with all family, all the time they are suffering because they cannot, especially for the survivor, they cannot forget what was happened to them in the captivity. And another thing, when they are coming, they become more deeply traumatized because they saw all their relatives, they are died in front of their eyes. In addition to that, they are living in bad situation, poverty, all of them they are. And also the important thing, till now, we cannot heal the injury of the Yazidi community and the survivor because they cannot forget what was happened. And the most important things, justice and accountability. Till now, there is no accountability and justice for any ISIS fighter to what they committed against the Yazidi. This is a very important issue. And unfortunately, our country till now, they don't recognize what happened to the Yazidi as genocide. In the world and international community and international organizations, they visit the survivor and they collect the evidence. But till now, we see there is a support of international community. We cannot deny that. But if you compare it with what happened, it is nothing. Because till now, we have 3,000 of the women and children, then they are unpaid, despite of like of all area under control of ISIS. Till now, we have 300,000 of the Yazidi. They are living in bad situation in the camps, despite the number of the Yazidi in Iraq is 500,000.
I want to intervene for a moment and also turn to you, High Commissioner, because you mentioned something very important that we actually haven't discussed, and I wish that we actually had an extra hour and a half for this panel, don't you? I mean, it's so great. Yes, don't you? Like, really, we should, yes. But you mentioned mental health.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about mental health. We haven't talked about what it does to the psyche, what it does emotionally to girls, women, boys, and men who are victimized. We also haven't talked about, we've covered it a little bit on this about what the consequences happen to be, right? And one of you mentioned silos, how we have to get away from the silos, because if we silo gender-based violence, then we're not thinking about what it means in terms of education and inability to be continually employed. We're not necessarily connecting violence to rape and sexual exploitation as you have, Kate. We're then not talking about the family relationships, which you were just talking about. And we're not actually talking then necessarily, some of it, about death. And I think that this is an important time to just recognize that a member of our UN family, Jen Shalak, was just murdered in New York last week by her husband, decapitated. And he nearly decapitated their daughter as well. So I just want to ask you, you speak of optimism. Just talk about decapitation. How can we stay optimistic given everything that we just heard?
Because among other things, you mentioned language matters, it matters. And when you have leaders of the world inciting hate, talking about inciting xenophobia, inciting violence, because violence against women, as many of you have said, is not isolated. It's in a context where violence is accepted. And you see countries where they have violence and there's impunity.
Yes.
I mean, there's no incentive to stop violence.
Yes.
So we need language matters.
Yes.
We have to held accountable. Who has to be accountable?
Yes.
and how to remain optimistic when you need to have systems, as Kate said, that has to be child, but also gender-friendly, gender-responsive. You have to train the judges, because they not only not do what they have to do, that sometimes they say, oh, but that woman was unfaithful, so she deserved to be, you know, stabbed or whatever. So we need to do so many things, but people say, Desmond Tutu says, I'm a prisoner of hope. That's the only way, because we believe that we don't need to give up. We don't want to be 24 months here stuck in the same.
That's right.
But the only way is not to give up, to continue, as you say, persistently, day by day, joining, making partnership, making our voices stronger, and putting more women, of course with men, but I believe we have few women.
Trevor, our token
in places.
man up here.
we need more women everywhere.
We do.
Yes.
We do. And on that point, we need women in critical mass, which is something that you've talked about and that you were committed to, because it's not enough to just have one woman as a figurehead. We need many women who are involved. Without that, it's hard to move an agenda.
And women with gender perspective, because you have women sometimes that say, I'm successful because I am great. Not that women that also have solidarity with other women, with girls, and with, of course, with men as well.
That's right, that's right, that's right. So I want to ask a final question to each of you, and I'm so sad that our time is zipping by. What do you see as next steps? The goal is to end gender-based violence by 2030. For someone who is being exploited right now, that seems so far off. Kate, you talked about rape and exploitation, you know, when governments call it prostitution, but it's really girls being trafficked. It's amazing. There are girls who are being trafficked not just sort of physically, but also online, video, and so forth, right? I mean, these are really terrible times in that way. How do you see 2030 and us getting there? What do you think that we need to do? What must we be committed to if this is to be real?
Yeah, I'm also a strategic optimist, and I really think that there are two big stories for this century that will unleash a level of prosperity and peace and innovation and security. And it's the two stories of tackling climate change and letting girls and women achieve their full potential. These two stories will drive humanity forward into a much better future where we're not dependent on incumbencies and living. We need to get together as a large progressive movement, and we need to get the attention of heads of state, foreign ministers, finance ministers, and we need them to understand that this century, the story of prosperity is going to be the story of girls and women and tackling environmental. It's human capital and natural capital, not just capital and patriarchy.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. And let's be clear that when you're saying that, you're talking about not until the most vulnerable of women and girls are lifted up. There is no prosperity until it's also prosperity for them too, right? That's critically important. Fatima, what do you see as next steps? What must we do towards making progress to end gender-based violence by 2030?
Well, first thing we need to do, to the key to ending gender-based violence, to empower women and women with disability also. Because if a woman cannot fight for her, what can we do for her? I mean, we cannot do something in her name. So we need to empower women. We need to be strong, proud, and visible. So please, let's do that.
All right. The Honorable Porter Williams? Yes.
Oh, okay.
What must we do?
I'm just amazed. By
I know, it's so enraptured by everybody else on the panel.
It's like a really great, great time just sharing some great ideas. For me, there's two things. We need to have the vision in 2030 of what we want our world to look like. What is it we want to see? And work back from there. And I think that currently we spend a lot of time working in the area of most need when we also need to be looking at prevention, education, and a whole lot of other things. But personally, my personal view is until we address the trauma that our children experience and make the world okay for our kids, we cannot change what happens into the future. We have to provide an environment where our children thrive. When they experience trauma, we do everything we can to allow them to recover from that and to fulfill their potential. That's boy children and girl children, and until that happens, we will not move the world.
Thank you so much.
I think mine is I think we need to change the strategy of how we are really working to lift or create spaces for women. I work with girls, and I think we've talked about the strategy and the systems. And for me, I think if we go from just the silo and look at as a girl as a holistically, her needs holistically. So if you are working with women or if you are working with girls, you have to look at education, you have to look at health, you have to look at all the things, the cultural aspect, the family aspect. You have to bring it all together to truly empower a woman. Because you can't just go into, I'll put her into school and then she's violated at school or on her way to school. So I teach my girls self-defense. But
I love it.
You really have to look at holistically.
Yes.
You have to do that. If we don't do that, we will be back here 10 years later saying we made this little progress, but yet we have this many more girls being violated, abused, traumatized, their dreams ending, the world becoming working towards making it better.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nazat, what do we need to do?
Yeah, in my view, the development of country depends on the development of the woman. This happens by empowerment of the woman more and more and achieving equality between women and men. The woman to work in different fields like health, to rely on themselves and to define on their rights. Another important thing also, we should work to reduce some of the habit and tradition who are affected against the woman, such as female genital mutilation, forced marriage and minor marriage and frequent birth. So we should control, or we should working on reducing this habit and tradition. Work to eliminate the illiteracy which affected and which has large proportions in the Asian and African country. This is very important. I cannot imagine we are in the 21st century and women insulted.
I know, right? I mean, it's 2019, and it's amazing that we're here dealing still with these questions. Trevor, what do we need to do by 2030 to reach the goals by 2030?
Okay, I believe what we need to do is to have integrated approaches towards ending gender-based violence. As I said earlier, and I'm going to state it again, we do not need to work in silos, otherwise we're not going to win.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. And finally, our High Commissioner, you've mentioned that we have to stay optimistic, right? That's a part of it. Any final thoughts of wisdom about what more we need to do? And you've given us already a lot, so much.
First of all, I think we know what we need to do.
Okay.
Maybe we haven't had enough time to go through all the areas. We know.
Yes.
But we need to walk the talk.
Yes.
Leaders need to implement what they say they're going to do.
Yes.
Because you listen to many... I mean, you listen to beautiful speeches, but we don't need more speeches. We need action.
Yes.
And I think we need partnerships.
Yes.
That we can all step up for women's rights, for men's rights. But we have more momentum, because ICPD will finish tomorrow, but next year we have Beijing plus 25.
Yes.
And we will have lots of activities next year, intergovernmental, but also with civil society, with private sector, and so on. So we need to continue pushing hard
Yes.
We know what needs to be done in a holistic approach. So let's do it.
All right, let's do it. I'm down with that. Let's do it. And so I would like to, Carl, come on up. Again, wrapping us up. And as I'd also like to have us reflect on things in terms of reproductive rights and justice as well, deeply and connected to these very questions, right? How can we ending gender-based violence when women may not have access to safe contraception or to have to choose when and how and under what conditions they want to become mothers. So we have to talk about that, and also has to be part of the agenda. Now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Hello? Maybe I'll take this. Thank you, Michelle. One approaches the role that I've been given with great humility, let me assure you, because it's amazing to sit here and listen to the courage and leadership expressed by these strong, strong people. Thank you very much for that. Obviously, we've been reminded that we're confronted daily by inequality and inequity. I think the story since Cairo amplifies this. If we just consider some of the Cairo commitments, and you alluded to them just now, Michelle. For example, infanticide in the last 5 years, down 20%, achieved over the last 25 years. Maternal mortality, only down by about 1/3 versus the target of 75%. But violence, as Dr. Gassman reminded us, as Dr. Bachelet reminded us, as all of the panelists have reminded us, stubbornly high, universally and stubbornly high. Violence does not respond to any of the traditional approaches that we've been able to deploy. This is a deep-seated problem that we face. Our world, we know, is non-binary, but we face a binary reality, and that's around power. And many of our speakers here this morning spoke about that. I mean, in the heteronormative context, that would be the power of men over women, or older people over young people, rich people over normal people. In this day and age, we see the power sometimes of loud people over thoughtful people. And we also see the power in the reproductive health context of doctors and providers over their patients or consumers, which is why we think self-care is such an important driver of a different power dynamic in reproductive health. As Dr. Bachelet reminded us, women are powerful. It's not for me to empower anyone. I can't give my power to anyone. Women are powerful. But society puts up barriers to their exercise of power. And it's only, and I think Minister Williams made this point as well, it's only by beginning to push back against power every time we encounter it that we begin to change social norms, that we begin to free people from the prisons of gender norms, from toxic masculinity, from all forms of toxic behavior. Misogyny and patriarchy are very often dressed up as culture. We must recognize this. We have to push through this reality. We must free all of us from power's tendency to dominate and corrupt. And Michelle, you and I can look back at our own country today and recognize we see the first public example of our institutions of the Republic beginning to grapple with this. How do we push back against abuses of power. You can watch this on television today in the United States. Kate reminded us that we need, and we will continue to need, a full spectrum effort, a full spectrum response in terms of our engagement, our approaches, even our language, changing the way we talk about these challenges. We need to think about capital differently. I love that framing. It was once said, and I think it's true of 2030, that 2030 will not be, and we must not assume it is the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it may be the beginning. We are in Kenya here in the land of long-distance runners. This is the country of Choge and Koskai, the winners of incredible human feats. They should inspire us, because we know our road is still long, the task is arduous, but the cause is true. We must have strategic optimism. We need strategic optimism. We must persevere. We choose to persevere. We persevere. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency for that, the importance of persevering. So as we wrap up, and I'm going to ask the panelists to just stay for a few photos after we wrap up, I want to thank you for the honor and privilege of allowing us to join you for this ceremony. I must say that personally, this means so very much to me, because these issues come very close to the heart, as they do for so many of the individuals on this panel. For so many of us, if not ourselves, it's our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers who've experienced gender-based violence. And if you all are here, you are making a commitment for us to end it and to create momentum towards it. At the end, it is only the beginning, and I thank you all for joining us this morning. Have a good meeting.
I march for a world in which all young girls reach their full potential.
I march for a world where everyone has an equal voice.
I march for women empowerment.
I march for gender equality. This is why I march.
I march for all adolescents to get the support they need to live healthy, happy, and productive lives. I march for young people's rights to be heard and be leaders in the communities and countries. This is why I march.
I march for freedoms, the freedoms that every woman and girl must experience to achieve their full potential in society, including the freedom to make sexual and reproductive health decisions of their own. This is why I march.
I march for women and girls. I march for gender equality. I march for women's right to choose. This is why I march.
I march
march for all the girls and women around the world who don't get to have the same freedoms that I do and that don't get to make the same choices that I can make. No woman should ever have to fight for something that is her human rights. This is why I march.
I march for the 68 million girls at risk of female genital mutilation. If we don't stand by them, they are alone. We need to recognize what they're going through, and this is why I march.
I march for my mum, I march for my sister, I march for human rights. I march for sexual reproductive health and the right to choose. I march for my right to enjoy my sexual reproductive health and to realize a world where LGBT rights are respected and protected. This is why I march.
I march for the survivors of sexual abuse, especially because of the shame and stigmatization attached to them. I believe that it's important for everyone to know that it's never their fault. This is why I march.
I march for that village woman who is having a third or fourth pregnancy, that she does not die bringing that life to the world. This is why I march.
I march for the reproductive rights of all women with disabilities. I want you to know that you have the right to sexual reproductive health, the right to information and communication, and the right to motherhood and child rearing. This is why I march.
I march for the right of women and girls to decide about their own bodies. Only they should decide who to love, when to love, whom to marry if at all, whether to have children, how many. This is why I march.
Let us remember today the 830 women who will die and the thousands more who will survive with severe injuries, all because of complications of pregnancy and childbirth, preventable complications, and this is why I march.
My name is Mette Knudsen. I'm the ambassador of Denmark to Kenya. I march for zero maternal death.
My name is Erin Bagifirongwe. I'm the Norwegian ambassador to Kenya. I march to eliminate child and forced marriage. That's why I march.
My name is Erik Lundberg and I'm the Finnish ambassador to Kenya. And I march for zero gender-based violence. That's what I march for.
My name is Anna Jardfelt. I'm the Swedish ambassador to Kenya. I march against sexual gender-based violence.
I march for gender parity. The main obstacle to gender equality is a question of power in a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture. So we need to have as many women as men in all positions of responsibility in our governments, in our societies, in our organizations.
I march for women and girls' rights, their sexual and reproductive health and rights, their right to make their own choices, the right to decide on their own body, their own life, their future, their lives. This is why I march.
I march for the empowerment of girls and women.
To have access to quality self-reproductive health.
For the quality of life every girl and woman deserve.
No girl or woman should ever have to fight for something that is her human rights.
I march for making sure that all girls and women are empowered to take action and make decisions about their lives.
And make the same choices that I'm able to make.
I march so that every Kenyan can have access to quality, affordable healthcare. No Kenyan woman should die while giving birth. I am convinced, and in line with government commitment, that it's possible to make UHC in Kenya a reality.
I march to reaffirm our commitment to deliver on the commitment of ICPD I march to empower young people to make decisions on the matters that are important to their lives.
I march for a world which protects and invests in the rights of young people to access their fullest sexual, reproductive and health rights over the next 130 months between now and the year 2030.
I march for young people's rights to be heard and be leaders in the communities and countries.
We march for the youth to lead happy, healthy and productive lives.
I march for the right to choose whether you have children and with whom you have children.
I march for every young girl that has lost their life because of procuring unsafe abortion due to the restrictive policy and legal framework in my country.
I march for the rights for every woman and girl to truly decide about her body, her life.
I march for sexual and reproductive health rights.
Every young person to have access to comprehensive sexual education to enable young people to protect their health, well-being and dignity.
I'm marching to Nairobi so that all adolescents in Africa have independent and universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights.
Because it's a human right and they deserve
with disabilities who have for long been excluded in sexual and reproductive health,
so that they are not embarrassed or shy to talk about their bodies, about sex to their partners when the time comes for them.
I march for the access of quality, youth-friendly, sexual and reproductive health services and comprehensive sexuality education.
Young people, especially adolescent girls and young women, they are catered for their rights.
To enjoy my sexual reproductive health and to realise a world where LGBT rights are respected and protected.